Alright, figured I'd make a new video. I know I had a Mafcomp slider videos, probably a little dated at this point. Somebody on the Ecmlink group on Facebook had posted up a log. He was using a mass airflow sensor. I was going over it, figured maybe I could make some use out of his log that he posted up. He was looking for some help on it, so figured I'd look over it. Go over a little bit more of the Mafcomp sliders. This is a full log, so I can go over a little bit more in detail. So go a little bit more in depth on this one. So this one might be a little bit longer. Anyway, first things first, he's using the Innovate wideband. Normally, a pretty good one to go with over AEM. If anybody's ever heard, I hate most of the digital AEM gauges because they have problems. At least with the older style gauges, matching what's here, or what's here matching the gauge. This one looks like he's got a good gauge to start with, so we don't have to worry about that. But generally speaking, with the Mafcomp sliders, when we're making adjustments to those, we're just trying to get our wideband and our air-fuel ratio estimate. Have these numbers match here. These are already pretty close. I'm normally ignoring these values overall at anything at idle or cruise, so long as I'm in closed loop operation. For those who aren't familiar with closed loop and open loop, do have a different video, so take the time to watch that one if you're not real familiar with the fuel trims, closed loop, open loop, and so on. But we are in closed loop right here. Generally speaking, I ignore these if it's relatively close to 14.7 at idle or cruise, steady state driving, easy on the throttle. I'm basically looking at my trims. I'm looking at my combined fuel trim, short-term fuel trim, long-term fuel trim low, having all these around zero right here at the moment in this particular portion of the log. We're looking fairly decent as far as our fuel trims are concerned, but our airflow per rev is somewhat low. If you get this too low, the problem you'll have here is that your O2 sensor will be ignored. You'll go into open loop and you can't get out of open loop if this value here is too low. So one thing we'll do, we'll go look in the Mafcomp slider section here. One thing you could do in the idle area, you could raise these sliders. It adds fuel, but it also at the same time it will raise this value here. So you may want to adjust a little bit at a time, but in doing so, it's going to richen up your mixture. So what you may have to do after doing that, you may have to come back to your fuel tab, and you'll have to remove some from your dead time, either global dead time. A lot of people like to use the injector battery adjust, which is basically the same as dead time, but it's voltage based as far as that's concerned. So you may have to come back and remove some here, and then remove some of that fuel back out. But back to the logging screen here. Just looking at a few things over here. Our idle position or ISE position a little bit high. Of course, you're still not up to coolant temp, so we may not look at that right at this very particular moment. We'll move over here a little bit. Now his TPS volts are a little bit low. May have to do a TPS adjustment. Again, I have another video in regards to that. I am seeing a lot of spikes out of his air-fuel ratio estimate here, and I also went over here and looked at his airflow smoothing tab. Is very low. A lot of these in this direct access tab have been adjusted. Probably set most of these back to stock. Set this back to stock in itself would probably alleviate a lot of these spikes out of his air fuel ratio estimate. Sometimes you'll see that with speed density, and adjusting that can help. Normally you may not need that, but it's more common with the mass airflow sensor. But if you're seeing it in a wide open throttle log, that'll help as well. But why it's so low, I honestly have no idea. Again, I'm just looking over the log, trying to help someone else as far as that's concerned. Now, if you look in this area right here, fuel trims are very high. He's lean in this area. Airflow per rev is looking a little bit more manageable. Usually want about a 0.24 for a 2.0 liter, somewhere around that area. Sometimes you get bigger cams or bigger displacement motor. You may look around 0.30, somewhere around that area. But anyway, we'll go look through a little bit more. See, and of course, a bunch of spikes here. And basically, overall, when we're using Mafcomp sliders, basically we're just trying to get these two lines here to match overall. And we're just going to pull this section right here. Another reason why I'm thinking the TPS volts is TPS volts, or it may need a TPS adjustment. I'm going to assume that he's probably close to wide open throttle here, and he's not at a full 5 volts here, and his throttle position sensor is only reading 97%. So that's leading me to think that he may need a TPS adjust, again, which I have the other video. The other thing I have noticed, I've looked over this previously, his idle switch is not moving. It's 0 all the way across. So what you may want to do, go to the RPM tab here, enable idle switch operation, and be good to simulate the idle switch from the TPS, especially if this is a second gen car, where the first gens have a idle switch from on the other side of the throttle position sensor. Now, if that goes bad, you could also still use the same feature here, using it from the TPS instead of that particular sensor, especially if you have an aftermarket throttle body that may not allow the idle switch in that area. That's where this section will be good for here as far as that's concerned. But so as far as idle switch, I'm not seeing that move at all. May want to enable that or alleviate that problem. But back to the section portion of the log, this is our wideband here. It's running a little bit lean as opposed to what we want to be. The air-fuel ratio estimate, this is our desired air-fuel ratio. This is what we're striving to achieve right here. Basically, we're trying to bring this line here down so that it matches this. And once they do and they're overlapping, then this wideband factor here will be about 0%. And basically what this is saying 10.9%. It's saying to add 10.9% of fuel to the mixture, and that'll bring this or this one right here down to the 12.1, which is desired. Now, of course, looking at this particular log, if we go into our open loop max octane and our minimum, our max octane table right here, this is probably a little bit lean mixture. I'm assuming he's probably on a pump gas tune, 91 octane, 93 octane, somewhere around there. Even the E85, it might be a little bit on the lean side. Probably go with a different fuel table. But that being said, this is basically normally a table where we would want to set our air-fuel mixture ratio, and then just once it's set, just leave it and forget it, and then we're just going to be going back and making any adjustments off the Mafcomp sliders. Now, some people will adjust global. There's different ways to do it. Some people will just adjust our global as far as our global dead time or injector battery adjust, but we're normally just going to be adjusting our adjusting the injector size. Even though you may have 450s, you can set it for a different size, and that'll either add or subtract the fuel to your mixture. So just because you have one particular size of injectors does not mean that you can't adjust this to add or subtract. Some people do that with the mass airflow sensor. I do it very commonly with speed density as far as making adjustments. But normally, when it's a mass airflow sensor, commonly what I like to do personally is once we've got I just throw in my set of injectors that I have globally. I set that, then I make any other fuel adjustments with my Mafcomp sliders here. So one thing I will say looking at this is that he's just adjusted the very start of the section here. This is the lower end of the scale as far as the what the mass airflow sensor is reading, and it reads in a hertz. When we look at the log here, we're looking at MAF raw. This is, if we're looking at 1200, which is a good starting point here, we'll just go back to the table. This is the section that it's looking at, 1200, which is this highlighted dot right here. If we move this up, it's going to add fuel. Move it down, it's going to remove fuel. But this is, when you start getting higher, it's a higher airflow from your mass airflow sensor. Eventually, it'll max out depending on the mass airflow sensor that you have, and that might be where you have to go to Mafcomp. Basically, where you go to speed density above this, where it cuts out and won't read anymore. Again, Mafcomp, that's also a different video I've got regarding this. But staying on track with this one, basically, first thing I would look at, this one right here, a little bit lower than the other ones. I don't know why we have such a sharp adjustment here. It's probably not going to react very well to that. Normally, you're going to want to have your sliders fairly in the same spot. Now, of course, I'm just making a guesstimate based on what this particular person has done as far as the tune. I may not even have it there to, uh, to start with. But one thing I will do, I'll get to start with before we get into the wide open throttle tuning. I'll go about and I'll get a nice uh, cruise log, idle, cruise, uh, light throttle, and I will adjust when doing so, I will put my open loop thresholds here to basically about what we have here. Keeps you in closed loop longer, so it gives more feedback to the O2 sensor, and it helps you give the ECU those estimates of what it's reading, and helps you get the adjustment calculations that it needs when it's in closed loop. So basically what I'll do, I'll use a whole log section here, and I'll take a right click over the log screen here. I'll do a Mafcomp adjust, which is combined fuel trim. I'll click on that, and it's going to plot based on what it's seeing where the dot should be, okay, as far as any adjustments that need to be made. Then basically you don't have to set them there, but normally what I'll do, I'll use template, and it doesn't always put them where they need to be, such as this one right here, for example. So if we wanted it more to a more realistic number, I'll just move that up, and we may need to smooth these out. Again, if you have a big, huge difference in one, it's like either dumping somebody's drink down their throat as they're trying to drink it, which is like adding too much fuel, or taking that cup away and not reacting very well to that. The car's not going to behave very well. So you want these somewhat smooth. So even though you may use this for the initial adjustments, you may have to adjust them and smooth them out. I'm only going what I'm seeing here, so I don't really have a full log with the full sweep of the throttle pedal, but normally you want to have 0 to 50% as many sweeps of the throttle position from 0 to 50%, and not going much more than that, trying to stay in closed loop so you can get as much readings as far as that's concerned, so you can make that calculated adjustment. So this would probably be more of a realistic reading to start with, and then go from there. I would probably have a longer log to go with, so you would normally have to go a little bit further into it, but I'm working with what I've got here. So let's just go back over to the wide open throttle section here, and we'll start with there. And normally what I'll do, I will start at the very top end section of it. Given that we've made all the adjustments, we've got a full throttle pull, and we're all the way at 100%. Normally I'll start at a third gear pull, or if you're automatic, maybe start somewhere slow. Go wide open throttle as far into it as you can. Let's say in third gear with the 5-speed manual. Starting as slow as you can, and until you go through all the way to redline. Try and get as much of a reading as you can. Now, of course, if you're going lean, you're not wanting to stay into it. Normally, I'll do a few steps at a time, maybe as slow as you can, 20 miles per hour, get up to 4,500 RPMs. The next pull, do the same thing, but maybe go up a little bit higher, say 6,500 RPMs. Then the red line, do it in gradual steps, so that way, if you start going lean, or if you start getting knocked, you're not steady into the throttle, and you're letting off to allow your time to make some adjustments before you get to that section. Okay, but basically what we're doing here, getting it to the very top of the pull, which is normally what I do, and I work my way back down into it, because let's say if I'm starting here and I'm making these adjustments, then I start back down and I kind of smooth it back into the lower end of the scale. But we'll say we're going to start, we want to have a rounded number. We'll say about 1,300, somewhere around in that area. Now you can see it's jumping around a little bit as far as our Mafraw. This is what we're looking at. Mafraw is basically what we're looking at as far as the Mafcomp sliders here. So jumping around a little bit, I want to get somewhere where it's around a smooth number. See, now we're sticking around with 1,200. We want to get to about 1,300. So we'll say 1,300 is 7.5%. So we'll go to that 1,300 slider, and said 7.5%. So all we do is bump it up 7.5 or as close to it as we can. It won't always go exactly that number. You're just trying to get relatively close. Okay. Then I step at the next one down, 1,200. So go back to our log, get down close to around 1,200, as close as we can get it. There it goes, spot on. 1,200 will be 10.9, so we'll go back over there, 10.9%, stop about right there. So go down the next one, 1100. And I just go on down the line just like this. Let's see, so it gets close to 1100, and now normally, I mean, these may not always, if you look at the wideband factory here, 1122 for Mafcomp, 1076, 14.5 for our wideband factor. So you'd have to smooth it in and get it, you know, relatively close to what you assume that it might be. You might want to cut it halfway in between the 12.0 here and the 14.5. Might cut it right around 13 just to get it somewhere relatively close. Okay, so we'll bump it up, say 13ish or so. So sometimes if you give it exactly what it needs, it might have a real high spike here. So you're just going to bring it down, smooth it out. Eventually, basically what you're looking for by the time you get done, all your sliders should just gradually blend in to what we're looking here. Okay. Now on the top end of the scale, just because we're not getting that high, let's say if 1300 was as high as we had gone and we don't see anything higher than that, doesn't mean that we want to leave all of these here at 0. Because what's going to happen is if at some point you do go above that, let's say you hit 1400 or 1500 and you never adjusted those before, well, now you got 0% here and you may go lean in that area. Don't want to go burning up your motor or having a problem here. So generally what I'm doing, I'm holding my shift button down and I'm hitting my right arrow to highlight them all. Then I let go of that, I hold down my control button, and I hit my up arrow. And I'm bringing them relatively close to where I left off here. So that way, if I am in this area where I did never reach before, at least if I hit those areas later on, I'm going to be giving it somewhat of a good guesstimate of where I should be, or at least to start with. Okay, but basically that's all we're doing, and then we're working our way down. And of course, with our 0 one here, I normally want to get it close to my 50 hertz if I'm on a stock math. If I'm on a GM math, then we're basically, GM math is going to usually idle right around 500 to 700, somewhere around that area. So normally these, you know, won't even be touched. It's usually going to be in a higher area, depending on what it is you have. But right now we're messing with the 2G math. This one I would probably bring it down a little bit. May have to make some adjustments to this overall. Of course, I haven't done any tuning on this whatsoever. So, but basically that's what we're doing here. Just making some adjustments to the Mafcomp. Just trying to adjust those a little bit, and that's basically it for this one. There's a lot we could probably go over. I'll just, since we are doing Mafcomp and a little bit more, we'll just go over a few tabs real quick. Global dead time set at 0. All adjustments are made by the injector battery adjust tab, so we're leaving this one at 0. Our fuel sliders at 0. Timing at sliders at 0. Mafcomp, we're not over reading our mass airflow sensor, so we're not going to use this one. A lot of times I'll see people enabling this even though they're not even using it. Now one thing I will say here, because we are talking about Mafcomp sliders, this box right here, it doesn't matter being if it's checked or unchecked with when we're using a mass airflow sensor. It does make a difference if we're using speed density. If we were using speed density, we're making adjustments to this table, and then any adjustments to, you know, if you made adjustments to these sliders here, this would affect the speed density table or our VE if this is unchecked. So if you don't want any of these adjustments affecting your tune with speed density, you want to make sure this is checked so that way it does not affect your speed density table here. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now I can tell just by looking at this that the software and firmware is probably not updated. There's another one here that we would normally add if the firmware was updated. Probably needs that. If he's got a stock mass airflow sensor and he's venting to atmosphere, he would probably want to enable idle air clamp. Again, I made another video on that one. That would probably be beneficial to him. Simulating a narrowband O2 sensor. Normally when I see this, I'm looking to see if it's a 2G or not. If it was, we could be benefiting from not simulating a narrowband O2 sensor and using both the wideband and the stock O2. He's a first gen, so may very well be good to be enabling narrowband O2 simulation with this particular one. Again, knock sensor right here. I made another video just here recently about anti-lag, and knock sensor control's got this very high numbers here. We want to probably bring those down. Fuel pressure, solenoid, and EGR. I don't know why he's got this enabled. That's something I would have to ask him. No boost control enabled. This one probably relatively decent, nothing really to mess with much there. Same for this one here. Now, while we have the knock sensor disabled, I don't know that if he has a problem with his knock sensor, he's not going to be able to find out what that there's a problem there. As far as that's concerned, I would probably leave that one checked. And then this is where he's got his O2 sensor put in for his pin assignment using the front O2 there. I don't know why I've got adjustments here. If he made adjustments here, I don't know why, because he's not even using this section here anyway. No big deal there, though. And again, basically we could go over here to the direct access table. Now as far as open loop thresholds here, there's been adjustments made here. We're only using these values if we're doing cruise, maybe idle or cruise. After you are done with that, whether mass airflow sensor or speed density, after you're done doing that, it'd be beneficial to either put it just back to stock values or maybe just a little bit higher if you're trying to keep it into closed loop a little bit higher. Don't keep it here because you end up risking raising your EGTs, which is your exhaust gas temperatures. Could do bad things to your engine. So as far as getting it hot, with your internals, so don't want to be doing that. So just remember to put those back to stock values or maybe just a little bit higher. And again, we've already discussed the open loop or your octane table is a little bit lean here, and the timing tables are a little bit high as well. I'd make adjustments to that, but these other ones here probably go back to stock values. I don't know why some of these adjustments are being made here, but other than that, I won't go into too much detail regarding these because we want to basically focus on the Mafcomp sliders here. But I'll leave it at that. If y'all have any questions, just feel free to reach out, give me a holler, or shoot questions up on some of the Ecmlink groups, either on Facebook or Ecmlink forums. So, all right, y'all have a good one.